So before we can talk about the light reactions, we have to talk about light and talk about how light is a form of energy. So light is a form of a particular kind of energy called electromagnetic energy. This includes things like light, but other things that you may be familiar with like UV, microwaves, X-rays are all examples of electromagnetic energy. And anything that's electromagnetic energy travels in waves. So if you could see microwaves, they would look like this. So if they were coming towards you, they'd be coming towards you like a wave, undulating. And because they are waves, when you talk about different types of electromagnetic energy, you can describe something called the wavelength. So the wavelength is the distance between peaks. So in this one, the first one that I've drawn, there's a pretty long wavelength. Other electromagnetic energy might move like this. It's still in waves, but notice now that this is a shorter wavelength. So these are actually measurable distances, and so we use meters for it, or rather a very small unit called nanometers, or NM for short, and that's 1/1000th of a meter. So it's very, very small. Okay, so that's why we can't see them. They're traveling in waves, but we can't see it because they're so fast and the wavelengths are so small. So as we're thinking about light, rather than say microwaves or UV, different colors of light have different wavelengths. So colors of light have different wavelengths. So either longer like this example over here or shorter like this one here. And the symbol for wavelengths is this. So I'm going to go ahead and use the symbol to give me some more space. So light is also considered to be a particle. So maybe you've heard of the dual nature of light. So it's a duality. It's both a wave, sort of nonstop, just up and down, or it's a distinct particle. And when we're talking about light as a particle, we call that a photon. So why is this important? Well, if it's a photon, that means each kind of wavelength or each type of light has a different and distinct amount of energy. So there's a distinct amount of energy to each type of light or to each type of electromagnetic energy. So for photosynthesis, it's important to realize that different colors of light will all have different amounts of energy. And so that will make the different colors of light either more useful for photosynthesis or less useful for photosynthesis. So this is the electromagnetic spectrum. So this includes all kinds of electromagnetic energy. So as I mentioned earlier, microwaves are part of this. Radio waves are as well. Infrared, if you've heard of that type. UV, X-rays, gamma rays, which are given off by radioactive materials. And then this little tiny section here is visible light. And so we've expanded the visible light here. So these are the only things that you can see in the electromagnetic spectrum. There's the different colors of light, ranging from reds and oranges and yellows all the way to blue and violet. And you can see along here that the different wavelengths are given. So the very far end is the red, 740 nanometers. The middle here in the yellows is 560, and the violet is 380. So each color of light, and so all these gradients of colors, like this would be like 370, 360 is slightly different purple, 350 is a slightly different purple. So every color has a distinct wavelength. And associated with that color of light is a distinct amount of energy, and there's an opposite relationship. The shorter the wavelengths, the more energy. So an opposite relationship. The lower the wavelength, so the shorter the wavelength, the greater the amount of energy. So gamma rays have a very short wavelength and they have a lot of energy. Radio waves have a much longer wavelength and they carry a lot less energy. If you think about, say, in this little part here, so visible light has a longer wavelength than UV or X-rays. So that means X-rays have more energy than light, and UV has more energy than light. And you may be familiar with some of the health consequences of, say, X-rays or UV. So UV, for example, has greater energy than just plain old visible light. So when you get a sunburn, it's from the energy in the UV. So sunblock actually blocks UV rays. And so that keeps the energy from getting into your skin cells. So you may know that sun exposure is a risk factor for getting skin cancer, and that's because these UV rays can penetrate into your skin cells and damage the cells, whereas just plain old regular light inside, right, so visible light that's just coming from our light bulbs doesn't have UV, and that's not going to give you damage to your cells. And then if you think about X-rays, you probably know that X-rays have even more energy, and because they have so much energy, not only do they go into your skin cells, but they actually pass through you because they have so much energy. So they'll pass through soft tissues and come out the other side, but they don't pass through as well through bone, so that's why they're used to make images of bone. But because they have so much energy and can pass through you, as they pass through you, they can damage your cells, and that's why they're associated with cancer. So the higher the energy, sort of the more risk there is of it damaging our bodies. Again, which is why these are associated with doing damage to us, and visible light isn't. Okay. But coming back to photosynthesis, the different colors of light all carry different amounts of energy, and the plant is only going to be able to use certain parts of these different colors in order to make glucose. So not every color will be useful for photosynthesis, and we're going to talk about why that is in a little bit. So as you're looking at this, you may be noticing that there's no white light. So we have lots of colors, but no white light, even though white light is what we're most familiar with. And so hopefully you know that white light is really a combination of all colors. So when you're seeing white light, your eyes are just detecting reds, orange, yellows, greens, blues, purples, and it's taking all of those different colors, and the message that it sends your brain is white. So in photosynthesis, the light from the sun is white light, so that includes all of the different colors, right? And it's going to hit the chlorophyll in the thylakoid membranes. And what happens is that all of those different colors are present. The chlorophyll pigment will absorb some of those colors, and then it will reflect or transmit some of those colors. The color that you see when you look at something is the transmitted or reflected light. So when we look at the chloroplasts, they appear green to us because they're reflecting or transmitting green light. The absorbed colors are all the other colors, and actually the absorbed colors are the colors that can be used for photosynthesis. So if we see green light, that's telling us that green light is not used well for photosynthesis. The plant mainly can't capture that energy. So why do pigments absorb all the other colors but not the green color? It has to do with what happens when light energy hits a pigment. So here's a little demo atom, right? So remember our basic atom with the nucleus and electrons in orbitals. So this is our simple model of an atom. When light energy shines onto a pigment, the chemistry of the pigment is in such a way that that light energy will be absorbed, and when it's absorbed, the electron gets boosted. So the other word for this is excited. So the electron kind of takes in that energy and it pushes the electron to the next orbital. So the electron was here, now it's in the second orbital. So it's carrying energy, it's got energy because it's further away from the nucleus. It doesn't like to be away from the nucleus, so getting pushed away from it is going to take energy, and the light is doing that. So now this is our excited electron out away from the nucleus. It's not going to stay there. It's very unstable because it wants to go back to here. Because it's unstable, though, it can be taken away. So an unstable electron is more easily captured by something else. So in photosynthesis, we will see that things will always start with light shining into the pigment. So light shines into the pigment, the electron gets excited, and that sets up the electron to be unstable and taken away by something else. And now the energy can be released from that electron. The amount of energy that it takes to excite the electron depends on the distance between these orbitals, and so that's why only some colors will provide the right amount of energy. So some pigments absorb blues, some pigments absorb yellows, some pigments absorb greens, right? Because of the amount of energy between those orbitals. So as I said, if that's the right amount of energy between the orbitals, then the excited electron will hang out there, become unstable, and that excited electron can be transferred to another molecule. That's transferring energy. So now that energy can be passed along and eventually used to make ATP or NADPH. So that's the basic idea of light reactions. Light energy is going to be converted into an excited electron, and that excited electron's energy is going to be given off to make ATP and NADPH. So let me write this here. Light energy is going to be transferred to an excited electron, and then in a series of events, that excited electron will give off its energy and be used to make the chemical energy of ATP and NADPH. So the pigments in the chloroplast is primarily chlorophyll A. Chlorophyll A has a dark green color, so that means it reflects dark green colors of light. There's also a chlorophyll B that's also present in lower quantities. Chlorophyll B is a lighter green, so it reflects slightly different green wavelengths of light. Plants also contain accessory pigments that are in the reds and oranges, things like beta carotene, which gets its name from, hopefully you see that, carrots, right? So beta carotene. Another one that we'll see in the lab is the xanthophylls, which are yellow pigments. These are really rich in aspens, which is why they turn a yellow color in the fall. And so these are always present in the plants. It's just that you mostly have chlorophyll A. Okay, so all of these are present, but there's so much more chlorophyll A that the only color that we see is green because it just takes over and you can't see these ones even though they're always there. So photosynthesis and the relationship to light color can be measured and analyzed using two different tools, an absorption spectrum and an action spectrum. An absorption spectrum focuses on wavelength. So on my x-axis, I have the nanometers, and then this is absorption on the y-axis. So for this experiment here, they looked at the different pigments, so chlorophyll A, chlorophyll B, beta carotene, and they looked at how well they were absorbed, how well the different pigments were absorbing different wavelengths of light. So for example, chlorophyll A absorbs around 425 nanometers the best, and about 675 the best, because there's a peak there and a peak there. Chlorophyll B, on the other hand, has a peak at around 450 and 650. So it better absorbs slightly different wavelengths. And then beta carotene is very different. It has a peak around 475 and around 450. So each pigment has slightly different wavelengths that it absorbs really well. Notice that, even though we said there's a peak here, it's not like it immediately goes to zero. It has some area where it's still absorbing somewhat, though not as much. An action spectrum is a similar idea. It's got nanometers on the x-axis, but instead of having absorption of pigments on the y-axis, it has rate of photosynthesis. And so this is really more telling you about how well the different wavelengths of light work for photosynthesis. And you can see that we get the highest rate of photosynthesis at 675 nanometers and another peak around 425. So notice that that correlates pretty well with chlorophyll A's absorption. And that's because chlorophyll A is the main pigment in plants. However, notice that I still have photosynthesis in these other places that chlorophyll does not absorb wavelength very well, and that's because of the accessory pigments. So accessory pigments are really important because they help the plant absorb all of the light energy from white light, because that's what comes from the sun. So even though chlorophyll is not that good at getting this energy, the accessory pigments help the plant still be able to carry out photosynthesis in those wavelengths, because again, light energy contains all of these wavelengths, and this helps the plant carry out more photosynthesis.